Part of how Sony has royally fucked up is not just the physical media and everything, but it's the physical media and everything else that's going on. Especially as like a newly minted Atlas fan that became a fan, because of Metaphor Phantasy. I effectively pre-ordered Final Fantasy Resonance for the Switch. And Persona 6, which I'm excited about, as well, is launching on Windows and Steam, and I just added it to my Steam wish list for the time when it comes out and everything. And then Tactics of Scarlet is Steam, Dragon Quest, Monsters, The Withered World. I have access to this on the Nintendo Switch or the PC. You know, Descent of Lunaris. Steam. Have access that way. Gravitar. I can access that through the Nintendo Switch 2 or the PC. Threads of Time. I'll be able to play this on the PC. Runa. So the PC, for this and everything will be easy. Save Seeker, this is PC only as it stands, so there's something that you won't be able to get out any other way. And then there's this. This is also the Persona 4 revival, which I'll be able to access on PC. You know, Celestial of Dolls, PC. Fire Emblem, which I already have access to through the Switch 2, which is the only one that's actually going to be exclusive, and the thing that actually justifies the Switch 2 purchase and everything for me, and everything. The Sacrifice, its platform is the PC, which I have access to. Metafinder 2, PC, but like Lost Elden, PC, Brigadine Abyss. So I'll just be able to access that through the Switch 2 or the PC. Like, probably leaning more in the direction of accessing it via the Switch 2, since I can take it with me and it's more convenient. Another Eden Begins, and I can just play that on PC or the Switch 2. Again, I mean, look at this. And Trails in the Sky, second chapter, platforms, PC, PlayStation 5, Nintendo Switch, Nintendo Switch 2. Do I even need to say anything more? PC or the Switch 2? And the Switch 2 is better because the battery life is longer than this laptop, so I can take it with me, when I'm going places. Cross Reverie, I'll be able to play that on the PC. Cul-de-sac Begins, I'll be able to play that on the Nintendo Switch or the PC. Prisma, PC, Fortune of Fate, PC or Switch, and Deca Police, PC, Seed of Nostalgia, PC, or GOG really would probably be the way to go for that one. And, Altacara, PC or Nintendo Switch 2, and that's it. That's the whole fucking list. So I go over this because what has happened effectively is that for somebody with my taste in games, what Sony has done is they've made the cost of leaving and not being locked into their and of leaving that ecosystem for some other ecosystem and trading it in, say purchasing an Xbox or we have the cost of that very like astronomically low as it's tiny. It's like pint scale tiny, and everything, leaving them as a platform and everything. They've just managed to absolutely destroy any real like cost of something lost for leaving and going somewhere else into another platform because like I said, there's zero turn-based exclusives on accessible some other way and everything. And contain nothing is coming in the next 2 years that we know about, that people that are also fans of the genre are just, if there isn't a Switch 2 launch, I'll play them on the PC. You know, so what Sony has done, it's very easy to just leave, you know, to just walk away from them as a, there's no, I guess, Apple managed to do a good job. People aren't willing to, go out and do what it takes to, set up and put forward a server that, runs iMessage, and, there were costs like Apple users think that um, they family member would just gift it to them, and everything, especially because they needed to be able to get in touch with you. Ultimate lock-in with iMessage that did a good job of keeping people who didn't want to be their dating lives to be affected and everything. Apple's ecosystem, but Sony has nothing that would make it, so that I felt the cost of leaving Sony and selling my PlayStation 5 on eBay. They've got nothing. Literally nothing.